Ever get that feeling like someone's reading over your shoulder, but instead of just a glance, they're seeing every email, text, online purchase, everything.
Yeah. It's like that moment when Snowden's leaks about the NSA, GCHQ, and all that surveillance stuff hit the news.
Hmm.
Suddenly, the whole privacy versus security debate wasn't just for, like, spy movies anymore.
Right, it became very real very quickly. So that's what we're diving into today, this world of whistleblowers and national security. And wow, you did not hold back on the source material. Official reports, Snowden's own book, articles dissecting it all, even an Amnesty International campaign about him. It's a lot.
It really highlights how surveillance has totally transformed. I mean, remember the old days of phone tapping? Agents, warrants, physically tacking lines.
Yeah.
It seems almost quaint now.
Quaint, how so?
It was so targeted, now it's all about intercepting internet traffic on this massive scale, a fire hose of data, and most of it has nothing to do with any real threat.
So instead of a needle in a haystack, it's like, what, trying to find a specific grain of sand on a beach?
Exactly. And get this, one of the reports here on GCHQ's program, Tempora, they actually call it a time machine, something that can slow down the internet to go through everything.
Wait, slow down the entire internet? How is that even possible?
Super complicated, but they're basically plugging into the backbone of how the internet works. But here's the thing. GCHQ, the NSA, they all say these programs are essential.
Yeah.
They claim they need all that data, even from everyday people, to connect the dots and stop terrorism before it happens.
But doesn't that seem risky? Like, where's the line? Today it's, we need this to stop terrorists. But tomorrow it's what? Let's just keep tabs on everyone just in case.
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mission creep, they call it. When the original goal slowly expands, and it's a huge concern. Governments claim they have tests for necessity and proportionality. But do those really hold up in the real world? And with the internet being global, can any country really control surveillance within their own borders? It gets messy fast.
Okay, so say we've got all this data. What happens then? What's going on inside of these intelligence agencies? I saw something in here about selectors, which sounds very technical.
Think of it like keywords you type into a search engine, but on a massive scale. Agencies like GCHQ use them to filter through all that data, hone in on specific things, and forget about humans reading every email. They're using these crazy complex algorithms, AI even, to look for patterns, red flags, you name it.
So like a super-powered digital detective sifting through billions of messages. And if something pops up, do actual humans step in then?
Absolutely. The human element's still key. Analysts have to look at what the algorithms flag, figure out if it's legit, and how risky it might be. High-stakes detective work, but the clues are in this massive digital haystack.
Which brings us back to Edward Snowden. Talk about a controversial figure. Amnesty International calls him a hero for exposing government overreach. Others call him a traitor who put national security at risk. How do we even reconcile those two completely opposite views?
That's Snowden in a nutshell, the whole whistleblower dilemma. Did he reveal programs that were illegal, that violated our rights? Maybe. But did he break the law? Potentially compromise sensitive intel? Maybe even put lives at risk? That's possible too. There are strong arguments on both sides, which makes it really tough to judge.
It forces us to confront this question. Does the public have a right to know about surveillance programs, even if it might risk national security?
That's the core issue. Intelligence agencies, they love this idea of translucency, not full transparency. Their argument, spilling the beans on how they work, is like giving a how-to guide to terrorists. But if the public and oversight are kept in the dark, how can we be sure these immense powers aren't being abused?
You mentioned oversight. These sources mentioned a couple of groups, the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, the Intelligence and Security Committee. What role do they play?
They're like the referees, making sure the intelligence agencies are playing by the rules. Supposed to be scrutinizing everything, making sure it's all legal and above board. Problem is, even they often operate in secrecy. After Snowden's leaks, a lot of people were demanding they step up their game, be more transparent, have more power to actually challenge the intelligence agencies.
It really does feel like we're walking this tightrope, security on one side, privacy on the other. And every time technology takes a leap, that rope gets thinner and thinner.
It's a race, no doubt.
Yeah.
And, reading Snowden's book, what struck me was this guy, he considered himself a patriot, right? Family history of government service, the whole 9 yards. But he still risked it all.
The review made him sound like, I don't know, this brilliant but kind of normal tech guy, believe in the mission, at least at first.
Yeah.
And then something changed.
Like he saw something he couldn't unsee, had to do something. Even if it meant becoming this, international fugitive. That's a whole other level of conviction.
Makes you wonder how many other people see similar things but stay silent. Because whistleblowing, it, it's not exactly a walk in the park, is it?
Not at all. You're ostracized, labeled a traitor, might
Yeah.
end up in exile like Snowden. It's a lonely path, high price to pay.
One article even called it a war on information, targeting whistleblowers and journalists. They said that's something you'd expect in some totalitarian state, not a democracy.
It's a scary thought, right? Because we depend on those people, whistleblowers, a free press, to keep power in check. They shine a light on the stuff that makes us uncomfortable. If they're silenced, then who's watching the watchers? Right.
Right. Okay, but has all this data collection actually made us safer? It's one thing to talk about what ifs, but what's the reality?
$1 million question, and honestly, no easy answer. Intelligence agencies, they'll point to cases like Najibullah Zazi. He was going to bomb the New York subway, but they caught him, said it was because they intercepted his communications bulk collection in action.
But there's always another side, right? Some people say those cases, they're exceptions, not the rule, and that good old-fashioned detective work could have gotten the same results.
True. And let's face it, the intelligence world isn't known for being open and transparent about their methods. Trust us doesn't really cut it after Snowden, does it?
Not really. Plus, even if there are successes, what about the cost? And I'm not just talking ethics here. Some of the figures on the infrastructure, the tech, the sheer number of people needed to run these programs.
Astronomical is an understatement. So it begs the question, could that money be better spent? What if we focused on more targeted programs, ones that respect privacy a bit more? Instead of this collect everything and we'll figure it out later approach.
It feels like there's a growing sense that we need a new way of doing things, something that finds that balance, security and personal freedom.
100%. It's a global issue now, too. Countries all over are trying to figure out how to do intelligence gathering in the age of the internet. We need to be effective and ethical, which is way harder than it sounds.
Speaking of effective, we've got all this data, supposedly, but how much of it is actually useful? One source mentioned that GCHQ has access to this insane amount of global data, more than they could ever actually go through.
Drinking from a fire hose, exactly. And the thing is, they've gotten really good at analyzing it. That same report said GCHQ has cracked problems that seemed impossible, like reconstructing content from just snippets of intercepted data.
Seriously, that's like, I don't even know, putting a puzzle back together, but with code instead of cardboard pieces.
Exactly that. They're constantly innovating, using crazy tech to gather and analyze data in ways most people can't even imagine. It's kind of fascinating, but also kind of terrifying.
It's like a constant race, intelligence agencies on one side, anyone who wants to keep their communications private on the other, and the tech just keeps accelerating.
And as it does, that line between what's possible and what's ethically okay, it gets blurrier and blurrier.
We talked about transparency earlier, but one article really dug into how intelligence agencies, they seem to prefer this idea of translucency instead.
Right, because if they reveal their whole playbook, they say it's like giving the bad guys the cheat codes. Puts lives at risk, the whole argument. But the flip side is, if it's all secretive, how can the public be sure that power isn't being abused?
And that's where those oversight groups come in, right? The Investigatory Powers Tribunal, for example.
They're supposed to be the impartial judges, making sure everything's above board. Problem is, they're pretty secretive themselves. Lots of criticism saying they don't have enough power to really challenge the intelligence agencies.
So we're back to that same need for more transparency, more accountability. It's a recurring theme here.
For sure. We can't even have a real discussion about surveillance if the balance of power is totally off. And right now, it kind of feels like it is.
Okay, so we've got the scale of data collection, the technology, the ethical concerns, but what about the impact on the ground? One source, a report about surveillance after Snowden, argued that his leaks actually changed how intelligence targets behave.
Yeah, it was a huge wake-up call. All of a sudden, everyone, from terrorists to your average criminal, knew they were being watched, so they adapted. The report even said some intel sources claimed their ability to track criminal activity actually went down after Snowden because people got better at using encryption, covering their tracks online.
Like a game of cat and mouse, but the mouse suddenly leveled up?
Exactly. And it raises another issue. We can debate the ethics of mass surveillance all day, but if it's not even effective, then what are we giving up our privacy for?
Good point. Speaking of which, you are not going to believe what else I found in this stack of info. An article about how the martini became the world's most popular cocktail. Talk about random.
Just goes to show, with bulk collection, you're going to get the important stuff mixed in with a whole lot of not so important stuff. It's like that needle in a haystack, but you find a martini recipe instead.
Which brings up a crucial point, right? Bulk collection, it's not ticky. It scoops up everything, whether it has anything to do with national security or not.
And for privacy advocates, that's a massive red flag. If the government is collecting everything, then privacy as we know it basically doesn't exist.
So where do we draw the line then? How do we balance security and freedom in the digital age?
That's the million-dollar question, no doubt about it. It's going to take serious thought, real debate, and a willingness to challenge how things are done now.
One thing that jumped out at me from these sources was this deep dive into how the UK handles surveillance, their whole legal framework for it. But even their own reports seem to be criticizing their approach.
Yeah, there was one in here that called the UK's bulk collection powers excessive and said their oversight is about as effective as, let me see, a screen door on a submarine.
Ouch. Not exactly a glowing review.
And remember that website you sent over, electrospaces.net,
Yeah.
the one that tracks all the intelligence stuff? They had a breakdown of how the U.S. classifies information, all the levels of secrecy they use.
Yeah, it was a lot to wade through, but what struck me was how much emphasis they put on keeping things under wraps. It's like the default setting is classify everything, even if it has nothing to do with actual national security.
It creates this culture of secrecy that makes it almost impossible to have a real, informed discussion about these issues. Because if we don't even know what's going on, how can we possibly hold our governments accountable?
And that lack of transparency just erodes trust, which is already in short supply these days.
It's a vicious cycle. Governments get more secretive, people get more suspicious, and suddenly having a rational conversation about surveillance in a democracy becomes nearly impossible.
So where do we go from here? What can we as individuals even do to push for more transparency, more accountability?
That's the question, isn't it? It can feel overwhelming, but there are things we can do. Being aware of the issues, supporting groups like Amnesty International that are fighting for transparency, contacting our elected officials. It all makes a difference.
It's about making our voices heard, even if it seems like we're yelling into the void sometimes.
Totally. And don't underestimate those everyday conversations either. Talk to friends, family, coworkers about this stuff. The more people who understand what's at stake, the more pressure we can put on our leaders to make real changes.
It's about changing the mindset, one conversation at a time.
You know, one thing that really stood out from the Amnesty International campaign was their support for Snowden. They basically called him a hero, said he gave up everything to expose something truly wrong.
It's easy to forget he's still living in exile, can't go home because of what he did.
That says a lot about the price of speaking truth to power. And it highlights why we need better protections for whistleblowers, not just in one country, but everywhere. People who see wrongdoing need to feel safe coming forward, knowing they'll be protected, not punished.
Because at the end of the day, a society that silences dissent, that punishes people for questioning authority, that's not a free society.
Exactly. Democracy depends on dissent, on being able to share ideas freely, even and maybe especially when those ideas are challenging.
Well said. Because this whole conversation, surveillance, privacy, it's about more than just tech or security, right? It's about what kind of society we want. One where freedom and privacy are valued, or one where those things slowly disappear in the name of safety.
It's a choice we all have to make, and it's a conversation that needs to keep happening.
It's heavy stuff, no question. But there's also something empowering about realizing we're not just pawns in this digital game. We do have choices, ways to push back, even if it feels kind of David and Goliath sometimes.
I agree, and those choices, they don't have to be huge life-changing things either. It's more about being mindful.
Yeah.
Like what's our digital footprint? What are we giving away every time we just click accept without even glancing at the terms of service?
So being more conscious about how we use tech. Choosing companies that seem to, I don't know, actually care about our privacy. Using encryption, even if it's just for our emails.
All of that, every little bit helps. And never underestimate the power of just talking about it. Having these conversations with people, raising awareness. That's how we start to shift the whole mindset, make privacy the default, not some afterthought.
You know, one thing that stuck with me, remember how GCHQ described their Tempora program? Being able to slow down the internet to sift through everything. That's kind of chilling when you really think about it. Our digital lives, just paused, examined, stored, all without us knowing.
It really drives home how much power these agencies have in the digital age.
Yeah.
And that's why it's on us, the public, to be pushing for transparency, accountability, making sure those powers are used responsibly, proportionally, not just because they can.
Before Snowden, I feel like a lot of people thought, what we do online, it stays online, right?
Yeah.
But His leaks just shattered that illusion, showed how transparent our online lives have become.
Totally. It was this watershed moment, right? Suddenly everyone had to face it. Those emails, texts, those late-night Google searches,
Mhm.
not so private after all. And that sparked a debate that's still going strong.
And it's not just governments anymore. Companies are scooping up tons of data on us, too, mostly to sell us stuff, but still. Our digital lives, they're being mined for profit, whether we like it or not.
Surveillance capitalism in action.
Mm.
And it brings up a whole other level of questions. Consent, data ownership, what does privacy even mean in this century?
So what do we do about it? How do we
Mhm.
deal with this new reality where privacy feels more and more like this luxury we can't afford?
No easy answers, that's for sure. But it starts with awareness. We got to know how our data is being collected, who's using it, governments, corporations, the whole nine yards. And we have to demand better.
Demand laws that protect our privacy, hold companies responsible when they screw up and our data gets leaked. Give us back some control over our own information.
Exactly. And support the groups who are fighting for this stuff. Electron Frontier Foundation, ACLU, Privacy International. They're the ones on the front lines of this whole digital rights battle.
It's about making noise, making it clear that we care, even if it seems like we're up against this tidal wave of data collection.
Every voice makes a difference. Every email to a politician, every donation to a privacy group, every conversation,
Yeah.
it adds up.
We've talked a lot about government surveillance, companies collecting data, but there's another side to this. How does all this surveillance change us? Our willingness to speak freely, to be ourselves.
The chilling effect, it's real. When we know we're being watched, even the possibility of it, we're less likely to rock the boat, speak out against something, challenge authority. That open, honest debate that's so crucial for a healthy democracy, it suffers.
Like we're all living in a panopticon, right? Always aware that someone could be watching. And that self-censorship, that fear, it eats away at the fabric of society.
100%. It creates this environment of fear and distrust where people are afraid to speak their minds, to challenge anything, and that is dangerous. A society that silences its dissenters is on a slippery slope to tyranny.
One of the reports talking about the aftermath of Snowden actually argued that his leaks, they might have made intelligence gathering harder. Terrorists, criminals, they got smarter, started using encryption, disappearing online.
Yeah, that's definitely a valid concern. But it also highlights this inherent tension in all of this, right? If we truly value privacy, if we believe people should be able to communicate securely without Big Brother looking over their shoulder, then we got to accept that there might be trade-offs. Absolute security and absolute privacy. Probably not going to happen at the same time.
It's about finding that balance, that sweet spot where we can protect both national security and individual freedom.
And that's why this conversation needs to keep going openly, honestly. What are the trade-offs? What are the risks, the benefits of all these different approaches? What about oversight, making sure someone's keeping an eye on the people in power? We can't just let the intelligence agencies and governments figure it out on their own. This is about our future, our privacy, our freedom.
Well said. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear. This conversation about whistleblowers, national security, the whole digital age, it's not ending anytime soon. It's complex, it's nuanced, there are no easy answers. But by staying engaged, by asking the tough questions, by demanding better, we can help create a future where privacy and security aren't at odds, but work together.
The future isn't set in stone. It's up to us to shape it.